Welcome back. This is Microsoft Virtual Academy. We're getting started with Template 10, and we're about to start talking about Model View View Model.
And how it interacts with Template 10.
That's right. We want to be clear, we're not about to describe Model View View Model. There are other courses on Microsoft Virtual Academy that can teach you that. We're going to talk about how we use it inside Template 10, and more importantly, what Template 10 is not trying to do with Model View View Model. Very good.
Sounds good.
In fact, let's start with that one caveat of what we're not trying to do. What we're not trying to do is displace other frameworks, because Darren and I both like many other MVVM frameworks, sort of like the MVVM Lite. We certainly like that. Caliburn and others, right? And all of those are still valid. And absolutely, if you're in love with those, you should continue to use them. And we'll demonstrate that here in just a second on how you can leverage those inside a Template 10 project, no problem. Meanwhile, we can't ship Template 10 as a fully MVVM ready framework without some sort of basic implementation of MVVM. So that does come with Template 10, but certainly isn't a requirement for you, but it was a requirement for us in order to complete the framework. Yeah.
Yep, sounds good.
So there's three files, three classes, I guess, basic implementations that you get with Template 10, and they're all very important, and they can all be overridden, and you can write your own. But the first one, and very, very handy, is bindable base. So where would you use bindable base, Darren?
I would use that as the foundation for everything that I'm going to build my view models on top of. That, in effect, I'm expecting it to provide me with the minimum capability that would expose the features that allow me to data bind an object to my presentation, my view.
That's right. At its core, it's the implementation of iNotify property change, which is the XAML-related interface for all of your data binding to be able to reflect the UI, in the UI, changes you do back in your classes. So that means I can update my class properties to a new value and trust that the UI is reflecting that new value as well. iNotify property change. You would implement this your own, and you probably already have your own bindable base, to be honest.
Most people do.
Why would you use ours? Well, one, it's already there. You don't have to write any more. Another important one, and if you override ours and use your own, just know that our bindable base inside its setter, or actually not the setter, sorry, inside the raise property changed event, is actually dispatching onto the correct UI thread. So if you're going to write your own, make sure you dispatch onto the right UI thread. So sometimes this will be a model that you're going to want to update, let's say a user model, you're going to want to update first name and last name and those to be reflected. So you would have your model actually inherit from bindable base.
And that's why it's bindable base as opposed to view model base, as an example, which is another object that we'll be talking about.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yes.
One of the key things that people may not realize is unless you dispatch the property change notification on the UI thread, your bindings will not actually update. They actually won't receive that message in the correct context, and so your UI will not reflect the changes, even though the values have been set.
Yeah, and sometimes those errors are actually swallowed, and so you don't see it until you really start debugging into it. Yes. Why isn't my UI being updated? So that dispatching back to the UI thread is very important. Unless you only have one thread. Some apps are very, very simple, and they don't try and do things in the background, don't have multiple views and things like that. So you may never have run across that, and you're wondering, what are you guys talking about? And perhaps you've just written applications that have single thread.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to say Template 10 is really there to help address the non-trivial scenarios that come whenever you're trying to build what we would say is a real app beyond a demo app.
Yeah, that's right. Beyond bindable base is another class that is provided that honestly baffles all of us on why it's not part of the root framework that ships with any XAML any application. But that is a full implementation of iCommand. And so sometimes that's called relay command. In our case, we call it delegate command. We get that name because it is, we get that name from Prism, actually. Yes. Prism used that name. But they're both the same. They're both implementations or bases of iCommand. What do you use an iCommand for? Typically, it's used on a button. That was really its original intent. And you would, instead of a click event, you would have a command property on a button. You would bind that command property then to the command property in your view model. And what would be going on there? Well, the command would determine whether or not it could actually execute. So it's not allowed to, let's say it's save. You would have a save command. It's not allowed to execute. It would disable the button. Then, when it would allowed, you would re-enable the button, click it, and it would actually execute the logic of that command as well.
Yeah, it really came about, it's a pattern of enterprise application designs, and it really came about because you often have multiple affordances in your application that achieve the same result, in that you think of the old school applications which have the big menu trees, then you might have a button on your form, you might have a status field, and so on and so forth.
And they're all save buttons, let's say.
Yes.
3 different places.
And they could all be attached to the same command. So if you had no data that required saving, the command would be disabled. And so all of those UI elements would be disabled automatically. And then when you had changed your data was dirty and needed to be saved, then globally it would update all those UI elements the same. And so it was a great pattern to bring into the XAML framework.
Yep. And so when you see the implementation of delegate command inside template 10, there are 3 versions of it. The first is the standard delegate command. This is really where only the command execute and can execute matter, where we don't care basically about the command parameter. Then there's also delegate command of T, and that's where basically setting the type of the parameter. So this is very handy. If you're going to save something, you might need to pass in a value from a text box or a value that you're binding in your view model. Really, it could be anything. And so there's a delegate command of T that uses the command parameter. And then the third one, which is definitely an elevated case that you wouldn't probably see used very often, is the awaitable delegate command and the awaitable delegate command of T. Very sophisticated implementation, very edge use case. It's in there. If you like that sort of thing, you can go for it. So you're going to see all of those implementations, the most common delegate command and delegate command of T.
Yeah, and it's important to realize that it's a very simple XAML syntax to bind these things.
Yeah.
You know, the button element has a command property that you would then bind to a command that was exposed by your view model. And then that makes it very
What you see a little bit different in UWP apps today is you don't see command used as much because now we can also use xbind to bind a click event directly to a method. So that we've never been able to do anything like that before.
Yeah, that's
Often
very
you
powerful.
don't care about can execute, you know, and so it's really handy you can do that.
Yeah, well, equally, you can bind your enabled property of your button to a property that's on your view model as well. So you can actually satisfy the same scope without perhaps sometimes the unnecessary abstraction of creating a command.
Yeah. You can't do MVVM without a bindable base. You can do MVVM without a delegate command, but you're going to want one, and now you've got one in template 10. If you use something like MVVM Lite, you have a bindable base and a delegate, they call it relay command to it.
Yes.
You get as well, but if you don't, then here you've got this as also. So that's 2 of 3. The third one is really specific to template 10, and that is the view model base. And so view model base automatically implements iNotify property change just like bindable base does as well. But in addition, it also implements the interface of iNavigable, which we talked about in the navigation service session, where iNavigable is that thing that gives you on navigated to and from inside your view model.
So it's a great aggregation.
It's a great aggregation. That's exactly right. And it also provides, as you can see here in the class diagram, also provides you the navigation service reference, the session state, and dispatcher, all of which we've already talked about, all of which super valuable. And so you get it for free inside your view model. These are just things you need. Just things you need.
Core foundations to implementing MVVM.
Right. All right, so that's what we provide. That's the template 10 MVVM classes. All right, it's not that much, but it really can get you a long way down the road before you find the need for more sophisticated frameworks. This actually might be enough for 80% of you. And I know that it's enough for 80% of the apps I write, right? Probably 100% of the apps I write, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, the only key thing that I would say that is really missing, if we're talking MVVM, is there isn't a messaging.
That's right.
Implementation. There's no pub/sub messaging beyond eventing.
And neither is there dependency injection or anything like that as well. And so I think it's worth pointing out what template 10 still supports, even though it provides this to you. And so the first is just third-party frameworks. Any third-party framework that you can imagine, we support it as well, right? And so it's important for you to know that once you fall in love with an MVVM framework out there, template 10 doesn't preclude you from using that.
Yeah, and when we say support, it's not because we have them baked in. What we have done is we've made the system flexible enough that you can hook in anything else into there. And so there are samples actually at the GitHub repository that demonstrate how you can hook in some of these things.
That's right, and I'll show that I'll show you one in just a second.
Sounds good.
Another thing I want to just make sure is that you mentioned messaging, I mentioned dependency injection. There's this idea of blendability, being able to do the design time work inside Blend and the designer as well. All of that is part of template 10 as well. And so we've been very attentive to make sure that we don't paint you into a corner and make sure that you don't rely on us. You can still rely on what you love. But let me show you. I'll show you an MVVM Lite implementation that a lot of developers are enjoying. And so, okay, take a look at, this is Visual Studio. I do not have one of my templates open. This is instead one of the samples. In fact, I've scoped to it so you can't quite see it, so let me back up. So this is the GitHub repository, basically. These are all of our samples. There's many samples here that show some of the core implementations of template 10 and kind of how to do things, including this one right here, the MVVM Lite implementation. So all I had done was scope to it. I'll do it again. And so this actually looks a lot like one of our templates that is simple with a couple different things. For one, it has view model base, which you'll remember is something that we provide, is view model base. But maybe if you're using your own template or your own framework, you're going to need your own view model base. And so let's take a look at what that looks like. So you can see it's still called view model base like you would expect, but instead of inheriting from view model base inside template 10, it's actually inheriting from view model base inside Galasoft, right? The MVVM Lite view model base that ships with it. The only thing we require is, sure, you know how to work with that. That's great. We don't know how to work with that yet. What we do know how to work with is iNavigable. So this requires us to implement iNavigable. So here are all those pieces all put together for us, basically the 6 methods inside iNavigable. And then the rest is handled by the base class of your app. Now, believe it or not, this is the full implementation and everything's done. So now anything you need to do inside your view model is completed. Now you can go and write your own view models, which is what we've done. And so if you look at the main page view model.
Just a couple of things to note, though, if you flip back just for a second, was the JSON ignores that there's a couple of properties on there because view models can be serialized.
Yes.
There's some things you don't want to serialize our navigation service, you don't want to serialize the dispatcher, you don't want to serialize the session state, because all of those things are scoped to a particular session of the application running, and so there's no point saving those or persisting those.
Even if they could be serialized, once you deserialize them, they're useless.
Yeah, they're useless,
Yeah, that's right. It's not common to serialize a view model. You may not need that in yours, but if it does, this just shows you how to.
Yeah, I mean, Prism, for example, established a paradigm where you could mark up properties on a view model.
That's
where
right.
You could serialize the view model. So, you know, those things exist. And again, we're making sure that we don't block those scenarios for you.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And so let's look at the implementation of the view model itself. Here we say MVVM view model base, just like we did before. It just happens to be there's a new MVVM namespace here that's local. And instead of being the template 10 view model, you can see it's messaging.mvvm view model. That's this local sample. And here we can still have the same overrides that we love and enjoy on Navigated 2 and all of the others. And from this point forward, you interact with it as if it's a MVVM Lite view model. And the rest is up to you and how you implement it. So the big step is to implement your own view model base. Hopefully you can see these 15 lines are not overburdensome for you to be able to do.
And if they are, you could copy it from this sample.
yeah, that's right. And you're ready to go, and now you're using that instead. So that's really great. And the same thing with delegate command. If you wanted to use the delegate command that ships with MVVM Lite, you just do. You just don't use ours. There's no big deal.
No big deal at all. And you know, this then facilitates the whole different way of binding your view models. You know, you can use the MVVM Lite view model locator to actually bind into your view model.
That's right. This sample actually shows using the locator. And so if you want to do that with the locator, then go to town. You want to instantiate it per page, go to town. It's up to you.
Yeah,
that's right.
We don't stop you.
We do not stop you, and we definitely don't force a certain paradigm on you. And that's the good news about MVVM Lite inside template 10. Those are the 3 things. That's a bindable base, delegate command, and the view model base, which is basically the implementation of iNavigable. Pretty cool, Darren.
Sounds good. Have fun.